How to lose 10 pounds of visceral fat in 50 days. Now, 10 pounds in 50 days may not seem like a lot, but I'm not talking about weight loss. I'm talking about fat loss, and specifically visceral fat loss. If you're a man watching this video, this is probably the exact kind of fat that you need to lose to look better, feel better, and be healthier. So in this video, I'm going to talk about what is visceral fat, what you can do to shed that fat so that you can look and feel better than ever. There are two types of fat in your body. The first one is called subcutaneous fat. And as the name suggests, this is the type of fat that's just under your skin. It's the type of fat that jiggles, you can pinch. You might not like the way it looks. You might not like the way it feels. Maybe it's stubborn and frustrating and annoying, but at the end of the day, it's not that harmful. The second type of fat is called visceral fat. And this is the fat that we'll be covering in today's video. And the reason we're covering it is because it is much more potentially dangerous for your health and your physique. And the reason it's so dangerous is because of where it is. Visceral fat is in your abdominal cavity. So it's underneath your stomach here, and it typically surrounds your vital organs, your liver, your pancreas, your kidneys, gallbladder, spleen. All of these things not only will affect your future health potentially, but also the way you metabolize and burn fat and or build muscle as well. So if you're a man watching this, it is very important that you understand the nature of how visceral fat works and the importance of getting that under control. It's not all doom and gloom. Unlike that stubborn subcutaneous fat, visceral fat is actually easier to lose if you know what you're doing. Visceral fat does typically affect men more than women, so if you're a man watching this, it's important that you take action immediately. The good news is you can lose visceral fat without even seeing much of a change on the scale. So I'm going to give you 5 actionable steps to show you how you can lose up to 10 pounds of visceral fat in just 50 days. But before we get into that, you might be wondering whether or not you have a lot of visceral fat. So there's going to be a couple tests that you should look out for. The best ways to determine whether or not you have a lot of visceral fat would be doing tests like a DEXA scan or an MRI, but realistically, you might not have access to those. So there are 2 other things that will really give you a good idea whether or not you have a lot of this visceral fat. The first one is just your waist size. So like I mentioned earlier, visceral fat is typically around the abdominal area. So grab yourself a tape measure. You can either do it yourself or get someone to do it for you. Wrap around the biggest part of your stomach. Not necessarily the belly button. It could be below, it can be above. Whatever that biggest point in your stomach is, you're going to wrap that tape measure around and you're going to find out how many inches your waist is. If it is 40 inches or more, typically you have a very high level of visceral fat, and it's something that you want to address quickly. The second test is your waist to hip ratio. Now, ideally, you want those hips to be bigger than your waist. So you're going to use that waist measurement that you just took, but you're also going to do the same thing for your hips. For your hip measurement, you're going to grab a tape measure and go over the biggest part of your butt. And whatever that measure is in inches, you're going to compare to your waist. Ideally, you want a ratio of 0.84 or lower. Again, hips should be bigger than waist. The closer they are, the more visceral fat you have. A lot of guys will actually have a bigger waist than hips, which again indicates a higher visceral level. So if you're 0.84 or below, that's a good sign, but it doesn't mean that you don't have to just completely neglect it at all. If you're above that level, it's something that you should really take into consideration ASAP. Without further ado, let's get into the 5 actionable steps that you can take to drop your visceral fat today. Number 1, get into a calorie deficit. This is the number 1 cardinal rule. If you're looking to drop weight, you need to get into a calorie deficit. You need to be burning off more calories than you take in. So if you're not seeing a change in the scale, you're probably not in a calorie deficit. So if you're not sure how many calories to take in, if you are interested in tracking, take your body weight, multiply it by 10, and track your calories using that number. So for instance, if you're 180 pounds, you multiply that by 10, your goal would be 1,800 calories. So that's step number 1. If your goal was only weight loss, that's all you need to do. But since we're looking to target specifically that visceral fat, there are some other things that you absolutely need to do. Number 2, food quality matters. Tracking your calories are great, and you can lose weight by eating nothing but pizza and Cheetos and Twinkies, But if you're really looking to improve your metabolic health, if you want to improve that visceral fat, food quality matters. The number one thing you want to watch out for here is processed foods. So you want to try to minimize, eliminate them as much as possible, and include foods that are very nutrient dense. A lot of foods that are high in vegetables and fruits. We got your vitamins and your minerals, but also making sure that you have a diet that's high in protein. If you want to track your protein, you can use your body weight and multiply it by 0.8 to 1.0 for grams. So if you're 180 pounds, anywhere between 160 to 180 grams of protein per day. Now, for some people, that might seem a little bit insurmountable, but as a general rule of thumb, just understand that protein is important. And if you're looking to lose that visceral fat, you should absolutely mind your protein intake. Number 3 is exercise. So no surprise here, but exercise will play a huge role in your metabolic health. Exercise is one of those things that doesn't necessarily directly impact that number on the scale, but it affects everything else, whether it's directly or indirectly. And there's 2 things that you really need to pay attention here. Number 1 is strength training. So for strength training, ideally you want to be training 3 to 5 days per week at the gym, lifting weights, doing some resistance training, and you want to try to do some compound movements. So you want to work your big muscles and you want to work lots of muscles. The second thing here is just your overall movement. So simply sitting down all day and getting a 45-minute workout, a 1-hour workout every single day is not enough. You actually need to be active throughout the day. And we're lucky to have the technology now. What we like to go through and what we like to use is simply tracking your steps. As a general rule of thumb, 10,000 steps or more indicates that you're relatively active. Now you can track this using your phone, your Fitbit, your Apple Watch. There's so many different apps that you can use. But the 2 things that you want to take into consideration exercise-wise, strength training, track your steps, get moving. Number 4 is to limit or avoid alcohol. Now we know alcohol is a poison, but if you're healthy, if you're active, and you drink moderately, probably not a big deal. But if you're drinking a lot, if you have a sedentary lifestyle, so you're not exercising much, if your diet is full of processed foods, or if you're overweight, that combination with alcohol can be a problem. It can lead to something called fatty liver, which is exactly what we're talking about when we're saying visceral fat. So this can affect your metabolic health, so your ability to burn fat and build muscle, but also can cause a bunch of health problems down the road. So if you have some of those pre-existing factors, so if you're sedentary, if you're overweight, if your nutrition is high in processed foods, you want to try to limit or avoid alcohol until you have those things under control. Number 5, which is the most boring and most important factor of all, is accountability, because nothing works if you don't do the thing. The reason people continue to fail with their fitness goals over and over and over again is not because they don't know what to do, it's because they can't stick to it. So there's typically 2 things that you need to address before you even get started. Number 1 is environment. So make sure you're setting yourself up in an environment that's conducive to success. If you have trigger foods in your house, get them out. If you struggle to go to the gym in the morning, make sure you put your gym clothes, your gym bag right by the door in the car. Make your good habits easy, make your bad habits hard. And then the second thing here is be proactive. As Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. You might have the best intentions going into the day, but what happens when work gets busy, when the kids are going crazy, and just life gets chaotic? Unless you have a contingency plan, you're almost always going to default back to what feels comfortable, back to what is convenient. So you order your takeout, you skip the gym, you go back to these automatic defaults. Instead, try to come up with a plan beforehand to have a contingency plan just in case those things happen, so that if and when they do, you have a backup plan. Also, it helps if you have a community, a friend group, a coach, a trainer, someone or anyone to help hold you accountable, because eventually that motivation will fade. And the ones who succeed are the ones who are able to do it because they have strong systems and accountability. So remember, weight loss and fat loss are not the same thing. And not all fat loss is created equal. Visceral fat is very much tied directly to your lifestyle habits. So these are 5 things that you can do to lose 10 pounds of visceral fat in just 50 days.